What if I told you that the biggest threat to your ability to know the truth is your own brain? We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures. We weigh evidence, consider options, and come to sound conclusions, right? But science tells a very different story. Imagine this: you're taking a test, and everyone around you gives the wrong answer. You know they're wrong, but somehow, you still go along with them. That's not just a hypothetical. It's the Asch conformity experiment, and 75% of people did exactly that. Why? Because your brain isn't built for truth. It's built for survival, for belonging, for emotional comfort. And as epistemologists, people who study how we know what we know, that's deeply unsettling. In this video, we'll explore how cognitive biases, those invisible mental shortcuts and emotional traps, shape what we believe, distort how we learn, and challenge the very foundation of knowledge itself. We'll connect dots between epistemology and psychology, from Plato to Kahneman, from the Gettier problem to the Dunning-Kruger effect. You'll discover why your certainty might be a warning sign, not a badge of confidence, and how intellectual humility might be the most underrated tool in your philosophical toolkit. This isn't about self-doubt. It's about epistemic self-awareness, learning how to spot the invisible strings pulling your thoughts. Because if your brain is lying to you, wouldn't you want to know? You live in a world obsessed with information. Every day, we are bombarded with claims, arguments, hot takes, and data. We read, scroll, listen, debate. But how often do we stop and ask the most basic question? How do I know what I think I know? That's the question at the heart of epistemology, the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature, sources, and limits of knowledge. It's one of the oldest disciplines in Western thought, stretching back to Plato and Aristotle, and yet it's more relevant today than ever. For most of philosophical history, knowledge was defined by a neat formula: justified true belief. If you believe something, have good reason to believe it, and it's actually true, then you know it. Seems simple, right? But what happens when your brain itself interferes with that process? What if the very tool you use to know your mind is riddled with errors, illusions, and shortcuts? Here's the uncomfortable truth: the brain evolved not to know the truth but to survive. And sometimes, survival means sacrificing accuracy for speed, certainty, or social harmony. What epistemology assumes: the classical approach to epistemology is based on three assumptions. Beliefs can be evaluated logically. Justifications can be weighed independently. Truth is discoverable through honest inquiry. But modern psychology and neuroscience have challenged each of these assumptions in surprising ways. Cognitive scientists like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, and Jonathan Haidt have uncovered a host of psychological mechanisms that distort how we form beliefs, assess evidence, and process contradiction. These discoveries don't just tell us that humans make mistakes. They reveal that our default mode of thinking is biased, and most of the time, we don't even know it's happening. The crisis of certainty. Let's take a quick thought experiment. Imagine you're in a courtroom, and a witness confidently identifies a suspect. They look the jury in the eye, they're sure. But science tells us, eyewitness memory is notoriously unreliable. Our memories are not perfect recordings, they're constructed stories, stitched together from fragments and filled in by emotion and expectation. Yet most jurors trust confident eyewitnesses more than uncertain ones, even if the latter are more accurate. Here's the problem: confidence feels like knowledge, but it isn't. Emotion feels like clarity, but it often isn't. Repetition feels like truth, but it definitely isn't. And this is where epistemology hits a wall. Belief does not equal truth. At the most basic level, epistemology distinguishes between belief and knowledge. Belief is personal, it's what you think is true. Knowledge is impersonal. It requires justification and correspondence with reality. But in practice, most of our beliefs aren't the product of rational deliberation. They're the product of habit, emotion, memory, environment, and trust in others. This doesn't mean all belief is irrational, but it does mean that rationality is the exception, not the rule. And if we don't factor in the flaws of human cognition, we'll build our epistemological theories on sand. Epistemology meets psychology. This is where a new hybrid discipline is emerging, one that blends classical philosophy with experimental psychology. We could call it cognitive epistemology. It asks questions like, what does it mean to justify a belief when our brain rewards us for avoiding dissonance? Can truth be pursued effectively by creatures who are evolutionarily biased toward simplicity? Is the traditional idea of the rational agent a myth? These are not abstract puzzles anymore. They touch everything from how we vote to how we remember to how we engage with each other online. Knowing in the 21st century, we no longer live in a world of scarce information. We live in a world of epistemic overload. Every day, we're forced to evaluate truth claims. Is this news article accurate? Is this study reliable? Is this expert really an expert? And if our mental software is running on ancient hardware built for survival in the savannah, not sorting through academic journals and viral content, then we need new tools, new habits, and new epistemic virtues. Because the real danger isn't just misinformation. It's misplaced confidence, and that danger starts within us. Coming up, in the next section, we'll dive deep into the machinery of the mind. The cognitive biases that quietly warp our perception of reality. We'll explore how your brain, without asking, filters, distorts, and edits your experiences to fit your expectations. And we'll ask if your thoughts are being shaped by biases you don't even see. Can you still claim to know what you believe? You probably think your thoughts are your own. That your judgments come from careful reasoning. That your beliefs are grounded in logic, facts, or experience. That your opinions reflect the world as it really is, but they don't, not entirely. Because between the world and your awareness of it lies something invisible, powerful, and relentless: cognitive bias. Bias is the mind's shortcut engine. It evolved to help us survive, to make decisions quickly, save mental energy, and avoid existential threats. But in a world where knowing has become more complex than ever before, these shortcuts don't always serve us. In fact, they often sabotage our efforts to see clearly. In this section, we'll explore what cognitive bias really is and isn't, why it exists, how it distorts the process of knowing, and most importantly, how to see it in yourself. What is cognitive bias? Cognitive biases are systematic errors in thinking that affect our decisions, beliefs, and judgments. They're not random mistakes, they're predictable patterns of distortion. Unlike logical fallacies, which are errors in reasoning, biases are more automatic and emotional. You don't choose them, they happen to you. In fact, many operate beneath conscious awareness. They don't just shape what you think, they shape how you think, and even what you notice in the first place. Why we have biases? Cognitive biases exist because thinking is expensive. The human brain consumes about 20% of your energy, even at rest. It's constantly managing perception, memory, emotion, prediction, and attention all at once. To cope, the brain uses mental shortcuts called heuristics. Heuristics are usually helpful. They let us make snap decisions in dangerous situations, navigate social interactions efficiently, filter out irrelevant data. But when applied to epistemic tasks like judging evidence, updating beliefs, or evaluating testimony, they can backfire spectacularly. Meet the biases. Let's examine a few of the most relevant cognitive biases that undermine knowledge. 1. Confirmation bias. You seek what supports you and ignore what threatens you. We naturally search for, interpret, and recall information that confirms our existing beliefs. If you believe climate change is real, you're more likely to click, read, and trust articles that affirm it. If you doubt vaccines, you're more likely to see every risk as proof of danger while dismissing the overwhelming evidence for safety. Confirmation bias protects your worldview. It shields your identity, but it also blinds you to the truth. 2. Anchoring bias. Your first impression sticks even when it's irrelevant. In one study, participants were asked, is the percentage of African countries in the UN greater or less than 65%? Then, what's your best guess? Another group was given 10% as the anchor instead. Those given 65% guessed far higher than those anchored at 10%, even though the anchor was arbitrary. Your brain latches onto initial values and adjusts insufficiently from them. That affects negotiations, judgments of probability, and even moral decisions. 3. Availability heuristic. What's vivid feels more true. You overestimate the likelihood of events that are easy to remember or imagine. Shark attacks, plane crash, kidnappings. All are statistically rare but dominate media coverage, so they feel common. In epistemology, this matters because we confuse salience with frequency and emotion with reliability. The more emotional a claim is, the more you remember it and the more likely you are to believe it again later. 4. Dunning-Kruger effect. The less you know, the more confident you are. People with low competence in a domain often overestimate their ability because they lack the metacognition to realize what they don't know. Meanwhile, experts tend to underestimate themselves because they're more aware of the complexity involved. In other words, incompetence breeds false certainty. Competence breeds doubt. Epistemically, this is a disaster. It means confidence often correlates inversely with credibility. 5. Belief perseverance. Even after being proven wrong, we cling to our beliefs. Studies show that people continue to believe debunked claims, especially if those claims are emotionally charged, related to identity, repeated often. In one experiment, participants were given false information about a person. Even after being told the information was fabricated, they still judged that person based on the original false data. Once a belief is integrated into your mental framework, dislodging it takes more than facts. It takes psychological disarmament. The epistemic cost of bias. All of these biases and dozens more have one thing in common. They compromise justification, even if your belief happens to be true, if the process by which you formed it was emotionally motivated, selectively informed, overconfidently defended. Then from an epistemological perspective, it's not knowledge. It's a lucky guess dressed up as certainty. Bias pollutes the very chain of justification that epistemologists rely on. Real-world illustrations. Let's ground this in examples. Eyewitness testimony is often inaccurate because memory is reconstructed, not recorded, and vulnerable to leading questions availability plus confidence. Social media feeds amplify confirmation bias and echo chambers, reinforcing existing views. Debates often go nowhere because both parties are defending identity, not truth, while suffering belief perseverance and motivated reasoning. Medical errors happen when doctors anchor on initial diagnoses and ignore disconfirming evidence. The point isn't just that people are irrational. It's that irrationality is built into how humans think. Can we escape bias? Short answer: no. Longer answer: we can't eliminate bias, but we can become aware of it and compensate. That's where epistemic self-awareness becomes crucial. It begins with simple internal habits, asking, what would I believe if the opposite were true? Seeking disconfirming evidence first, valuing uncertainty as a sign of rigor, not weakness. Pausing before reacting to emotionally charged claims. Coming up, in the next section, we'll take a closer look at how bias doesn't just cloud individual belief, it undermines the entire epistemic structure we've built to separate knowledge from opinion. We'll revisit the classical epistemological model and ask, what happens when your evidence is biased, your reasoning is motivated, and your justification is emotional? Is knowledge still possible in a world like that? Let's find out. In the last section, we explored how bias warps individual thinking, shaping what you remember, which evidence you notice, and how confident you feel. But epistemology isn't just about isolated thoughts. It's about the structure of knowledge itself. What counts as a belief? What counts as justification? What counts as knowledge? Cognitive bias doesn't just make us irrational. It threatens the very framework that epistemology depends on. To understand how, we need to return to the classic model of knowledge, then stress-test it under pressure: the traditional epistemic chain. The traditional epistemic chain, since Plato, the standard account of knowledge has followed this model. Knowledge equals justified true belief. To know something, 3 conditions must be met. You believe it, it's actually true. You have a good reason, justification for believing it. If you believe something false, gives, it's not knowledge. If you believe something true by accident, gives, it's still not knowledge. Only when all 3 align does belief graduate into knowledge. But this neat formula runs into a problem. Your brain is not a neutral processor. It is constantly filtering, framing, and reshaping information, especially at the justification stage. Biased beliefs. The first crack. Let's start with belief itself. Beliefs are not neutral containers. They are emotionally charged, identity-linked, socially reinforced mental habits. Most of your beliefs are formed non-reflectively through upbringing, culture, repetition, and personal experience, not by rigorous analysis. In fact, once you form a belief, your brain works very hard to protect it. Belief comes first, justification comes later. and usually, it's backfilled to match. This process is called motivated reasoning when we interpret information in a way that supports our desired conclusions. It means that even if a belief happens to be true, it may be epistemically rotten at the core. The Gettier problem: knowledge without knowing. In 1963, philosopher Edmund Gettier published a short paper that shattered centuries of epistemological confidence. He presented cases where all three conditions of knowledge were met but something still felt wrong. Here's a simplified version. The fake barn example: imagine you're driving through the countryside and see what looks like a barn. You believe it's a barn. It is a real barn. You have visual justification. But what you don't know is that this region is full of fake barn facades and you just happen to see the only real one. Do you really know it's a barn? Most people say, no. Even though your belief is true and justified, the path to that belief feels too lucky. Gettier showed that justified true belief isn't enough. There needs to be something else, something about the reliability or robustness of the process. But here's where bias becomes lethal. What if your justification itself is always contaminated by unconscious bias? What if the barn you see is always being selected, interpreted, or filtered by internal cognitive shortcuts, biased justifications, when evidence lies? Let's say you believe people who disagree with me are misinformed. You then go online and see someone share a bad take. You conclude, see, I was right, but your reasoning might be driven by confirmation bias. You notice that post but ignore reasonable dissent. Fundamental attribution error: you assume the poster is dumb, not just uninformed. Group polarization: you're surrounded by others reinforcing your reaction. Your belief feels justified, but epistemologically, it's on shaky ground. Your brain has constructed a chain of reasoning, but the links are crooked. And here's the twist: the more intelligent you are, the better you are at constructing sophisticated justifications for biased conclusions. This is known as the bias blind spot, the tendency to think other people are biased, but not yourself. Biased truth, when reality bends. Finally, bias also affects our access to truth. Now, truth in philosophy is a contested term. Correspondence theory says truth is what matches reality. Coherence theory says truth is what fits within a consistent system. Pragmatic theory says truth is what works. But regardless of your camp, you need some way of accessing or verifying truth. And here's the problem: modern environments distort access to reality. Example: algorithms show you content that matches your preferences. Media outlets tailor narratives to your emotional triggers. You receive selectively edited videos, filtered facts, and polarized discourse. It's not that truth is gone. It's that your ability to detect it has been systematically undermined. Even if you want the truth, your cognitive environment feeds you comfortable illusions instead. Thought experiment: the biased jury. Let's imagine a courtroom. 12 jurors must decide if the defendant is guilty. They're all smart, educated, and well-meaning, but one juror is unconsciously biased against the defendant's accent. Another is swayed by an emotional story, not evidence. A third wants to agree with the most vocal person to avoid conflict. A fourth anchored to their first impression and won't budge. None of them knows they're biased. Darkwa composition of scene number 206. A solitary figure in a dreamlike classroom, planting seeds of doubt, surrounded by scales weighed with beliefs. The figure's expression reveals resolve to question. Strong color contrast and symbolic composition with emotional focus. Orner. The need for robust epistemology. If justified true belief isn't enough and if bias undermines justification, then what is knowledge? This is where epistemologists have shifted from formulaic definitions to process-based models. Reliabilism. Beliefs count as knowledge if they come from reliable processes. Virtue epistemology. Knowledge comes from epistemic character traits like intellectual humility. Social epistemology. Truth depends on the health of informational communities. In all cases, the message is clear: bias cannot be eliminated, but knowledge requires we account for it. You must build systems internally and socially that recognize and resist bias. That means questioning your intuitions, seeking disconfirmation before confirmation, evaluating sources with epistemic integrity, not emotional loyalty. Coming up, in the next section, we'll zoom out from individual cognition and step into the cave. We'll see how Plato and Kahneman, two thinkers 2,400 years apart, diagnosed the same mental trap. mistaking what feels true for what is true. You'll learn why your brain loves illusions and why breaking free requires more than logic. It requires courage. What do a Greek philosopher writing in 380 BCE and a Nobel-winning psychologist in the 21st century have in common? They both believed we're trapped in illusions. And they both tried to show us the way out. This section explores the deep resonance between Plato's Allegory of the Cave and Daniel Kahneman's dual-process theory of thinking. Though separated by millennia, both thinkers arrived at a similar truth. Human perception is fallible, belief is fragile. And truth, if we can ever reach it, requires effort, discomfort, and radical reorientation. Plato's Allegory of the Cave. In Book 7 of the Republic, Plato describes a group of people who have lived chained in a cave all their lives. They face a blank wall, watching shadows projected from objects behind them, illuminated by fire. They think the shadows are reality. Then one prisoner is freed. He turns around, sees the fire, then the objects. Eventually, he escapes the cave and sees the sun, the true source of light. At first, the light blinds him, but gradually, he adjusts. And only then does he understand the truth, Plato's point. Most people mistake appearances for reality. And the journey to real knowledge is painful. It involves breaking your bonds, habits of thought, turning around, questioning assumptions, facing the light, exposing yourself to disorienting truths. And if you go back to tell the others what you've seen, they'll think you're mad. Kahneman's thinking fast and slow. Now fast forward to 1,400 years. Daniel Kahneman, working with Amos Tversky, revolutionized our understanding of the mind with dual-process theory. System 1, fast, automatic, emotional, intuitive. System 2, slow, deliberate, rational, analytical. System 1 handles most of our day-to-day thinking. It's efficient, but prone to errors, especially when it comes to abstract reasoning or probability. System 2 is capable of logical analysis, but it's lazy. It often rubber stamps System 1's conclusions. Kahneman's experiments, like the famous bat and ball problem, demonstrated just how easily System 1 can mislead us, and how rarely we activate System 2 unless forced to. The overlap, shadows, and shortcuts. Here's where the two thinkers converge. In Plato's cave, the shadows are not deliberate lies. They're convenient illusions. The prisoners believe them because they're familiar, repeated, and socially reinforced. In Kahneman's system, System 1 isn't irrational. It's optimally efficient, but it favors coherence, simplicity, and emotion over complexity or doubt. Both thinkers describe a mind that defaults to ease over effort. And both warn that truth is not the mind's natural destination. You have to choose to break free of illusions, and even then, it hurts. The psychology of comfort. Why do we prefer shadows? Because shadows are clearer than the messy truth, faster to interpret. Socially shared, everyone sees them, too. System 1 thinking loves certainty. Plato's prisoners are comforted by the familiarity of the wall. Kahneman's fast brain is comforted by the fluency of quick judgments. In both models, the truth is cognitively uncomfortable. A modern cave, the algorithmic feed. Let's update Plato's cave. Instead of shadows, imagine TikToks, news headlines, opinion threads, AI-generated content, filtered reels, and curated beliefs. You're staring at a screen, personalized just for you. What you see feels vivid, feels true, feels like insight, but it's a shadow. Modern algorithms function like Plato's fire. They cast illusions, not with malice, but with optimization. They want your attention, and what gets attention? Certainty, outrage, simplicity, tribe. The result? A world where everyone feels well-informed but few actually are. Everyone thinks they've seen the light, but they're still staring at shadows. The emotional resistance to truth. Why don't people want to leave the cave? Because truth costs something. It forces you to admit you were wrong. Update long-held beliefs. Leave your group. Accept uncertainty. And this is where epistemology becomes personal. Knowledge isn't just a philosophical exercise. It's an existential threat to comfort, belonging, and identity. Plato knew this. Kahneman proved it. Let's walk through Plato's Allegory again, but this time, step by step, as a metaphor for your own mind. You begin in the shadows, facing flickers of light that feel like truth but are actually illusions. These are the instinctive impressions, gut reactions, and default assumptions that System 1 thinking feeds you. fast, emotional, effortless. You believe what you see because it's all you've ever seen. Then comes a moment of doubt. Something doesn't fit. You feel discomfort. That's the first crack. In cognitive terms, this is when dissonance emerges, the tension between what your mind expects and what it encounters. Like the freed prisoner turning his head for the first time, your awareness shifts. The world seems less stable, but more interesting. Next, you begin to notice the fire itself, the source of those shadows. Your system starts to awaken. This is where reasoning kicks in. You begin to examine the structure of the illusions, to trace where your impressions came from. You slow down. You ask questions. As you make your way out of the cave, your thoughts become more deliberate. You move beyond surface impressions toward deeper insights. This is sustained critical thought, active engagement with ambiguity. It's not comfortable, but it's powerful. Eventually, you emerge into the sunlight. At first, it's overwhelming, blinding, even. But gradually, your mind adjusts. You see reality more clearly. This is epistemic clarity, the kind that comes not from certainty, but from courage, humility, and earned understanding. And finally, if you try to return to the cave to share what you've seen, you face resistance. People won't believe you. They'll call you arrogant, deluded, or disloyal. And that's the final stage, the social risk of telling the truth in a world still enchanted by shadows. Why this still matters, you might think. Okay, I get it. Bias, illusion, fast thinking, so what? Here's why it matters. If you're unaware of System 1, you're ruled by it. If you mistake speed for truth, you'll trust your instincts over evidence. If you fear uncertainty, you'll choose false clarity over honest complexity. Propaganda, pseudoscience, conspiracy. They exploit your System 1, they feed the shadows on the wall. To resist, you don't need to be a genius. You need to be willing to pause, to reflect, to turn around. Escaping the cave in real life. Here are small acts of epistemic courage. Slow down your reactions. When you feel outraged, ask, is this real? Who benefits from me believing this? Seek contradictory sources. Find smart people who disagree with you and stay open. Practice intellectual humility. Saying, I don't know, is a mark of strength, not weakness. Use your discomfort. Let it signal where your beliefs might be fragile. Plato's allegory isn't just a metaphor. It's a map. Kahneman's system isn't just a theory. It's a warning. If you want to know the truth, really know it, you must earn it, and that begins with doubt. Coming up, in the next section, we'll ask a new question. If individuals are biased, what happens when they gather in groups? We'll explore the rise of social epistemology, where knowledge is distributed, constructed, and often distorted by community dynamics. From groupthink to testimony to online echo chambers, we'll look at how truth can get louder or lost in a crowd. So far, we've examined the individual's mind, the hidden machinery of bias, the illusions we inherit from evolution, and the struggle between fast and slow thinking. But you don't think in isolation. You scroll, you read, you debate, you watch. You're part of an epistemic ecosystem, and that changes everything. Welcome to social epistemology, the study of how knowledge is shaped, distributed, validated, or corrupted within groups. In this section, we'll explore why so much of what you know comes from others, how communities create confidence but not always truth, how group bias, echo chambers, and engineered consensus warp belief, and how to remain intellectually independent without becoming epistemically isolated. Knowledge is mostly borrowed, let's be honest. You didn't verify the speed of light. You didn't calculate the Earth's curvature. You didn't personally review every climate model. Most of what you know comes from testimony, the reports and claims of other people. And that's normal. Human civilization is built on epistemic outsourcing. We rely on scientists, historians, journalists, teachers, and even friends to transmit information. If we had to independently verify every fact, we'd never get past breakfast. But this raises an uncomfortable question. When is it rational to trust others, and when does trust become credulity? The epistemology of testimony, traditional epistemology focused on individual justification. Can you justify your belief? But social epistemology asks, what counts as a trustworthy informant? Key criteria include expertise. Does this person have domain knowledge? Sincerity. Are they trying to tell the truth? Track record. Have they been right in the past? Transparency. Can you see how they reach their conclusion? But modern media complicates all of these. You can't assess a TikTok creator's peer-reviewed history. You can't check whether an influencer's research is just vibes and viral charisma. The line between information and performance is blurring and the danger is clear. We confuse being persuasive with being right. Groupthink. When communities corrupt cognition. Humans are social animals. We evolved to value belonging over accuracy. That's why groupthink is so epistemically dangerous. In the 1950s, Solomon Asch ran famous conformity experiments. Participants were asked to compare line lengths but were surrounded by actors giving the wrong answer. Result: 75% of participants conformed at least once even when they knew the answer was wrong. That's not stupidity. That's epistemic self-preservation. Your brain has evolved to keep you in the tribe even if it means doubting your own senses. The echo chamber effect. In the digital age, tribal thinking has gone algorithmic. You follow people who think like you. They retweet sources you already trust. Your feed becomes a hall of mirrors, soon. You're not just surrounded by like-minded people. You start to believe everyone sees what you see. Dissenting views feel wrong, even dangerous. And then something strange happens. Certainty increases but understanding decreases. You've substituted epistemic diversity for emotional validation. Your beliefs feel stronger but are less likely to be challenged. Filter bubbles and algorithmic authority. Platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Twitter X, and Facebook don't care about truth. They care about engagement. What keeps you watching? Emotion, outrage, certainty, tribe. So they feed you what you're likely to agree with, and they do it invisibly. Soon, you're not seeing the world. You're seeing a version of the world curated for your psychological profile. This is epistemic manipulation by design. Anxious users get fear-based content. Angry users get enemies to blame. Confused users get simplistic clarity. It's not censorship, it's customization. And that's more dangerous. The illusion of consensus. Imagine you hear the same claim from your favorite podcast, a viral infographic, 3 tweets, a common thread. It feels like consensus, so it feels true. But consensus isn't always knowledge. In psychology, this is called the availability cascade, the idea that repetition breeds believability, even when the original source is weak. It's how conspiracy theories spread. It's how misinformation goes mainstream. If you hear it enough times from enough voices, you believe it. Not because it's true, but because it's everywhere. Epistemic peer pressure. We like to imagine ourselves as rational agents. But deep down, we also want to be liked, respected, affirmed. So we conform not just in behavior, but in belief. This creates what philosophers call epistemic injustice. When people are punished not for being wrong, but for being right too early. Or for questioning narratives their group isn't ready to examine. Think of whistleblowers. Think of scientists whose data is inconvenient. Think of friends who challenge your assumptions. Sometimes, knowing the truth costs social capital. And most people would rather be wrong together than right alone. Can communities help us know, despite all this, the solution is not to isolate yourself. Total epistemic individualism is a trap. You'll drown in misinformation or drift into solipsism. The answer isn't to reject community, it's to curate it. What you need are epistemic peers who challenge, not just echo. Communities of inquiry where disagreement is welcomed. Environments of slow thinking that reward nuance. Knowledge can be communal when the group values truth more than cohesion. That's what science is supposed to be. That's what philosophy has always tried to be. And it's what our digital networks could become if we build them deliberately. Practical steps. Staying smart in a noisy crowd. To protect yourself without disconnecting, diversify your inputs. Follow smart people who disagree with you ideologically, methodologically, and culturally. Slow down your reactions. Ask, am I reacting to this or thinking about it? Verify through triangulation. Don't trust a claim until you've seen it in 3 different contexts with clear sources. Watch your emotions. Outrage is not evidence. Comfort is not clarity. Being epistemically responsible doesn't mean being cynical, it means being deliberate. Coming up, in the next section, we'll ask a troubling question. What if the whole idea of the rational agent is a myth? We'll look at how philosophers and psychologists have grappled with human limitations and why the very traits that make someone appear rational might be hiding something else. Is your brain really designed to know the truth? Or just to win arguments? Let's dig deeper. Epistemology traditionally treats humans as rational agents, individuals who form beliefs based on evidence, revise them in light of new information, and seek truth above convenience. That's the ideal, but is it real? In this section, we'll explore why the rational thinker may be more fiction than fact, how psychology challenges the classical model of reasoning, why intelligence and rationality are not the same, and how honest thinking requires more than just logic, it requires character. The Enlightenment dream. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the rise of Enlightenment rationalism. Thinkers like Descartes, Spinoza, and Kant believed that human beings, through reason alone, could uncover objective truths. The scientific method, deductive reasoning, moral universals, and epistemology followed suit. If a person believes something, and they have evidence for it, and it's true, then they know it. But this assumes something huge, that people are capable of reasoning clearly in the first place. Modern cognitive science tells a different story. The bounded rationality model. In the 1950s, economist Herbert Simon introduced the concept of bounded rationality. Humans, he argued, aren't perfectly rational. We operate under limited information, limited time, limited computational power, so instead of optimizing decisions, we choose the first option that feels good enough. This shattered the idea of humans as consistent, evidence-driven agents. Instead, we're improvisers feeling our way through complexity with incomplete tools. You aren't Sherlock Holmes. You're a mental MacGyver with duct tape, emotion, and partial memory. The illusion of introspection. Another blow came from studies in social psychology. Researchers like Timothy Wilson and Richard Nisbett showed that people often don't know why they believe what they believe. And worse, they invent explanations after the fact that feel true but aren't. This is called confabulation, constructing a plausible narrative that makes you feel like your decision was reasoned, even when it wasn't. Example, a shopper is shown for identical pairs of socks. They pick the last one, then explain it felt softer. But they always pick the last one. It's a position bias, and the softness explanation is retroactive justification. Your brain wants to believe it's in control. But often, it's just rationalizing post hoc decisions made on impulse. Intelligence does not equal rationality. You might think, well, maybe most people are like that. But smart people surely reason better, not necessarily. Research by Keith Stanovich and Richard West shows that intelligence correlates weakly with rationality. You can have a high IQ and still fall for conspiracy theories, believe in pseudoscience, be wildly overconfident in your opinions. Why? Because smart people are better at constructing defenses for their beliefs. They're better at cherry-picking, justifying, rationalizing. In other words, stupid reasoning is dangerous. But sophisticated self-deception might be worse. Rationality is a virtue, not a default. Here's the hard truth. Rationality isn't a capacity, it's a discipline. Just like physical fitness, it requires practice, challenging your own beliefs, discomfort, sitting with uncertainty, humility, acknowledging your limits. The rational agent isn't born, they're built. This is why modern epistemologists like Linda Zagzebski and Ernest Sosa have shifted toward virtue epistemology. It's not just what you believe, it's how you believe it. Being a good knower requires intellectual courage, intellectual humility, love of truth over tribal belonging. These aren't cognitive skills, they're character traits. The rational agent is a myth but not a lie. So, where does this leave us? If rational agents don't exist as a default, if most of our beliefs are emotional, social, or subconscious, if introspection is flawed and IQ is no guarantee, then can we still trust people to pursue knowledge at all? Yes, but only if we redefine rationality. Not as cold logic, not as pure intellect, but as epistemic virtue, a commitment to truth even when it hurts. The point of epistemology isn't to describe perfect thinkers. It's to cultivate better ones. You're not born rational. You become rational by training your habits, resisting your biases, and nurturing your conscience. Coming up, in the next section, we'll build on this idea of epistemic character. You'll meet the epistemic virtues that modern philosophers believe are essential not just for learning truth, but for surviving in a post-truth world. Because knowledge isn't about what you store, it's about how you stand. So far, we've seen how fragile knowing really is. Our brains are biased, our communities are distorted, and the myth of the perfectly rational thinker has crumbled. But this is not a cause for despair. In fact, it's an invitation. Because if knowledge is no longer just about logic or evidence, if it depends on how we engage with truth, then we must cultivate the personal qualities that support it. These are the epistemic virtues, habits of mind and heart that help us become better knowers in a world full of error. In this section, we'll explore what virtue epistemology is and why it matters, the core virtues that support responsible belief, how to practice them in everyday life, why they matter more than ever in a digital, post-truth world. What is virtue epistemology? Traditional epistemology focused on belief structures. What makes a belief justified? What counts as evidence? Virtue epistemology shifts focus to the believer. What kind of person is likely to form true, justified beliefs? Just like ethics focuses on moral character rather than moral rules, virtue epistemology focuses on epistemic character rather than formulas. It asks, what traits make someone intellectually trustworthy? How can we cultivate habits that reduce error? Can knowledge be understood as an achievement of the knower? Philosophers like Linda Zagzebski, Ernest Sosa, and Jason Beer argue that the pursuit of knowledge is not just a cognitive task but a moral one. Knowing is not value neutral. It requires virtues of the intellect. The core epistemic virtues. Let's explore the 5 most essential virtues: practical, powerful, and deeply countercultural in an age of noise. 1. Intellectual humility, the willingness to admit you might be wrong. This is not low self-esteem, it's clear-sighted self-awareness. It means recognizing the limits of your knowledge, the fallibility of your memory, the influence of your environment. Humble thinkers say, I'm not sure. Let me look that up. You may be right. I've changed my mind. In a world obsessed with certainty and hot takes, humility is radical. 2. Intellectual curiosity, the drive to seek knowledge, even when it's inconvenient. Curiosity asks, what don't I know? What's the other side of this story? Why do people I disagree with believe what they do? It pushes you toward unfamiliar ideas, uncomfortable questions, and complex answers. Without curiosity, you stagnate in dogma. With it, you grow beyond your cognitive bubble. 3. Intellectual courage, the strength to pursue truth even when it costs something. Truth is not always welcome. It may alienate you from your group, challenge your worldview, require you to admit past error. Intellectual courage is the decision to follow the evidence wherever it leads even when it's painful. It's what whistleblowers show. It's what scientists risk. It's what Socrates died for. 4. Intellectual integrity, the commitment to consistency and honesty in belief. This means applying the same standards to yourself as you do to others, being honest about your reasons, avoiding double standards and cherry-picking. It's the opposite of rationalization. It's thinking with a clean conscience. When you speak from intellectual integrity, your beliefs aren't just clever, they're honest. 5. Intellectual tenacity, the willingness to keep thinking when it would be easier to stop. The truth is rarely quick. It often requires rereading, reevaluating, sitting with discomfort, waiting for clarity. In an age of clickbait, dopamine, and endless scroll, tenacity is rare. But it's what makes deep understanding possible. Practicing epistemic virtue, these aren't abstract ideals. They're daily disciplines. Try this. When you feel confident, ask, what would I need to see to change my mind? When you feel smug, ask, could someone smart disagree with me? When you feel overwhelmed, ask, what do I need to learn more about? Epistemic virtue isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest and rigorous in the pursuit of truth. It's a mindset, a posture, a kind of intellectual integrity you carry into every conversation, article, or idea. Why this matters now, in a digital world. Opinions spread faster than facts. Loudness is mistaken for insight. Identity becomes entangled with belief. The result: we don't just disagree, we doubt each other's right to know. Epistemic virtue is how we resist this decay. It's how we stay sane, how we stay fair, how we protect our minds without closing them. You don't need to be a scholar to be epistemically virtuous. You just need to care more about what's true than what's easy. Epistemic virtue is power. If knowledge is power, then virtue is what keeps power from becoming manipulation. In a world of noise, you can be a signal. In a world of performance, you can be honest. In a world of certainty, you can model wisdom. Because the wise don't just know more, they know how to know. Coming up, in the next section, we'll ask, now that we know how knowing breaks and how to rebuild, how do we actually live this out? We'll explore tools, practices, and habits for epistemic resilience in everyday life. Because in the end, truth isn't a possession, it's a pursuit. So far, you've seen just how fragile the pursuit of knowledge really is. Our minds are biased, our communities mislead, our technology distorts, even our reasoning betrays us. And yet, we still long for truth. We still ask questions, still wonder, still want to know not just what to believe, but how to believe well. This section is about practice, about building an epistemic life that reflects what we've learned so far. Because in a world designed to overwhelm and mislead you, living wisely is a form of rebellion. Start with metacognition. If the brain is a tool and a fallible one, then the first step is learning how to observe it. This is metacognition, thinking about your thinking. Start asking, why do I believe this? Where did this belief come from? What am I afraid to question? What would it cost me to change my mind? Metacognition doesn't give you certainty, but it gives you awareness. And that is the foundation of intellectual integrity. Seek disconfirmation first. Your brain craves confirmation. It wants to be right, feel safe, and belong. So if you want to grow epistemically, flip the instinct. Don't ask, how can I prove I'm right? Ask, how might I be wrong, before accepting a claim. Look for the strongest arguments against it. Read opposing views in good faith. Steelman, not strawman counterpoints. Disconfirmation is not self-punishment, it's a loyalty test to truth. Practice epistemic minimalism. Not every idea deserves your attention. Not every take deserves your response. Not every belief must be held. In an age of information glut, one virtue stands out: epistemic restraint. That means letting go of beliefs you haven't examined. Refusing to have opinions on everything, saying I don't know more often. Sometimes, not knowing is wiser than holding a belief you can't justify. Choose diverse epistemic environments. If everyone around you agrees with you, you're in danger. Not because they're wrong, but because you're blind to what else might be true. Intellectual growth requires epistemic diversity. That means engaging with people from different disciplines, cultures, ideologies, following writers, thinkers, and scholars who challenge your assumptions. Stepping outside your identity bubble and asking, what am I missing? Knowledge loves contrast. Wisdom welcomes it. Use better tools. Knowing well is hard. So use tools designed to help you think better. Here are a few. Bayesian reasoning. Update your beliefs incrementally based on new evidence, not emotionally. Steelmaning. Present the best version of your opponent's argument before critiquing it. Socratic questioning. Ask follow-up questions that probe assumptions and logic. Red teaming. Deliberately seek to destroy your own idea and see if it survives. Intellectual journaling. Track what you believe and why it changes over time. These aren't rules, they're rituals of respect for truth and for your own mind. Watch your media diet. Your information environment shapes your mind. So be intentional about what you consume. Try this. Slow down. Read long form, not just headlines. Balance. Mix perspectives: mainstream, independent, international. Verify. Double-check sources before internalizing. Disconnect. Take breaks from the feed to recalibrate. Your attention is finite. Guard it like an epistemic asset. Practice public discernment. You don't just consume ideas, you share them. So be a responsible transmitter. Don't retweet outrage just because it feels right. Don't repost statistics you haven't traced. Don't amplify voices because they're viral, amplify because they're valuable. Epistemic virtue isn't just private, it's public character. You are part of someone else's epistemic environment. Be the kind of source you'd want others to be for you. Build epistemic habits, not epiphanies. Knowing well isn't about a single breakthrough, it's about sustainable patterns. Think in terms of daily reflections, weekly reevaluations, seasonal deep dives, annual belief audits. This doesn't mean obsessing over every opinion. It means building a life where truth has room to breathe. Because truth isn't just something you get, it's something you make space for. The goal isn't certainty, it's clarity. If you've come this far, you've probably let go of the fantasy of being perfectly informed, immune to bias, or always right. Good. Now you can pursue something better. Clarity. Clarity is not knowing everything. It's knowing what you do know and what you don't. It's understanding where your beliefs come from, how much weight they deserve, and what would change them. Clarity is clean thinking, clean believing, clean living. And it's available to anyone willing to do the work. Coming up, in the final section, we'll zoom out. We'll reflect on what this journey means. And we'll end where epistemology always leads, not with triumph, but with transcendence. Because if truth begins with doubt, then wisdom begins with surrender. Let's return to where we began. You thought your brain told you the truth. You thought you saw the world as it is. You thought knowing was about getting the facts right. But along the way, you've uncovered something deeper. You've seen how easily belief bends to comfort, how memory distorts, how emotion replaces logic, how groups shape what seems obvious, how algorithms craft your reality, and how your own mind without your consent can lie to you. And yet, you're still here. Still curious, still listening, still reaching for light. That's not a failure of rationality, that's a victory of consciousness. Beyond knowing, wisdom as orientation. If epistemology is the study of knowledge, wisdom is its application with care, awareness, and humility. Knowledge says, I know. Wisdom asks, should I speak? Knowledge says, here's the data. Wisdom asks, what does it mean? Knowledge says, this is true. Wisdom asks, for whom, when, at what cost? In a noisy world, wisdom doesn't shout louder, it listens better. It doesn't seek certainty, it seeks understanding. It doesn't rush to judgment, it sits with the unknown. You are the cave and the escape. Plato's Allegory wasn't just about society. It was about you. The shadows on the wall are your assumptions, your filters, your pride, your fears, your desire to be right. The fire is your instinct, the light is clarity. The pain is letting go, and the escape? That's the moment you choose not to believe something because it feels good but because it's been earned. The light outside the cave isn't a place, it's a way of seeing. Truth isn't a destination, it's a discipline. You'll never escape bias entirely. You'll never be perfectly rational. You'll never hold beliefs that aren't shaped by emotion and experience. But you can learn to live awake. You can pause when it matters. Ask better questions. Welcome challenge. Change your mind with grace. That's what it means to be a good knower. Not someone who knows everything, but someone who respects knowledge enough to carry it carefully. Your mind is not your enemy. Even after everything bias, distortion, illusion, your mind isn't broken. It's human. And if you treat it like something sacred, not infallible, but improvable, you will grow. So instead of mistrusting your thoughts completely, start learning to work with them. Notice them, challenge them, respect them. Let your mind be a garden, not a fortress. Cultivate it. A final reflection. You began this journey thinking about cognitive bias. But maybe what you found is something larger. That knowledge is not just what we have, it's how we hold it. And how we hold it says something about who we are. So here's the final question this video asks. Are you willing to believe less so you can know more? Are you willing to be wrong so you can become wiser? Are you willing to let go of certainty so you can walk toward light? If so, you're already out of the cave. Now help someone else find the way. Want more content like this? Subscribe for deep dives into philosophy, psychology, and the art of knowing well. For further reading, check out the links below. Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Epistemic Injustice by Miranda Fricker. Virtues of the Mind by Linda Zagzebski. The Demon-Haunted World by Carl Sagan. Share your favorite insight in the comments. What belief have you changed recently and why?